Hello there! It is another Tuesday, which of course means it's time for another in real life video. As per usual with these IRL videos, feel free to submit questions, which we can answer and address on these videos, and also submissions for rankings. And it helps a bunch if in either of the two cases you include a question mark in your comment below, because every week before I record one of these, I go and check at least the most recent video. I go back 1 week and check and see what everyone put in there with a question mark. I add it to an ever-growing and, of course, ever-shrinking list. This week, we are, of course, taking a general viewer submitted question. We don't always. Sometimes something topical has come up, but this is somewhat topical. And it is a question submitted by a general viewer whose username should be somewhere in the bottom third of your screen right about now. And they ask, let me see here and bring it up. They write in saying, not sure if you've already covered the topic for an IRL, but how do you feel about remakes slash remasters slash new versions of games? Some really just feel like cash grabs, but others seem genuine, and more still are odd choices, but do make sense, like Oblivion instead of Morrowind, and Assassin's Creed Black Flag instead of 1 or 2 Revelations, etc. This is something that we have talked about a little bit. I think it was actually a while ago in maybe Morrowind Mondays Volume 1, if I remember correctly. But of course, a lot of this is spurred forward to the forefront of our thoughts because of Oblivion Remastered and the purported rumors surrounding a Fallout 3 remaster, and if that's anything to go by, possibly a New Vegas remaster. We don't know for certain, but it's probably going to happen. We've talked about this before, but this is more so about not whether or not they exist, but more so about, you know, the creative merits of it. The sort of idea of like, okay, how does this feel? And I think, honestly, the question asker here, the question itself, sort of gets to the crux of the way to tackle it, and that is you kind of got to go on a case-by-case basis, right? I don't really enjoy the idea of just blanket statementing all of them and being like, well, every remake or every remaster or all of them are always going to be bad, you know? I think, true enough, there are some which are very, very obvious cash grabs, some which had very little work put into them, which, to clarify, I don't think is necessarily always at the feet of, like, the people working on the remaster or remake. You know, what immediately springs to my mind is that Warcraft 3 Reforged bundle from, I think, 2 or 3 years now. That was like a disaster, but I think that was also a result. It was a symptom of like not having enough time and money devoted to the project. You know, like it was a cash grab in that sense. Not so much like I'm very much not keen to believe the like sort of jaded idea of like, oh, someone on the development team is just out for money. You know, oftentimes it is because someone at a higher position in the studio or their parent company has decided, well, you only have this amount of time, your budget needs to be cut back, we're going to lay off X amount of your studio, stuff like that gets in the way. I think there's very few people who go into development, especially at like on smaller scale, whether you're doing like programming or art assets or whatever. I think very few of those people enter that field and do that work from a very like, I don't know, insincere point of view. You know, I think a lot of people sincerely show up and want to like work on the project and want the project to be a success. You know, I think there's very little of that on the lower rungs of the corporate ladder, as it were. But you know, it does exist in some form or function. And we do definitely see it. But as for like the creative merits, you know, to take it back a bit, I personally am a very much like, oh my gosh, 2 cakes type of person, you know, the sort of expression like, oh, you have, God, I don't even remember the original, but it's a situation where it's like, oh, you've accidentally made or ordered one cake that's in chocolate and another that's like yellow sheet cake or whatever. Oh, what am I to do? Holy cow, whoops, looks like we have 2 cakes. What a terrible problem to have. But I tend to be in that realm of things. I come from sort of my perspective comes from the perspective of like, well, depending on how interested I am in the project. So for instance, if we take a look at like the Elder Scrolls and Oblivion, I do have a proclivity to prefer the original work over the remaster or remake, you know, if it were a remake. I don't think I necessarily have a preference one way or the other over remake or versus remaster. It's just a matter of the passage of time out from the original project. Like, I scoffed at the Last of Us Part 2 remaster, I think it was, because that was so... That happened so shortly after The Last of Us Part 2 came out. And that is already like a gorgeous game. You know, that's already a game that looks mind-blowingly good. And it came out so shortly after the original body of work. I feel like you needed more time in between to sort of warrant, at least to me, mentally, the idea like, okay, this could do with a remaster. This could do with a remake. There needs to be some sort of fairly substantial, not just significant and noticeable, but fairly substantial, like, technical difference, you know? And as well, what really helps me, going back into the case of Oblivion Remastered, is the availability and accessibility of the original body of work. So I think I would, yeah, in fact, I most certainly would be very cross with the idea of Oblivion Remaster coming out, the Oblivion Remastered coming out, being released in a world in which it just full-on replaces original Oblivion. You know, I would not be down for that. I think that would be sacrilegious. I think that would be a horrible state of affairs if they put out Oblivion Remastered and then like delisted from every storefront possible and stopped, even maybe even going so far as to take it off of like shelves, anything beyond like a used copy, which I don't think they're on shelves anywhere, huh? That isn't a used copy, but of original Oblivion. Certainly off of digital storefronts. Take it off of like digital storefronts, delist it from Steam, stuff like that. I think that would be abhorrent. That would be terrible, right? I'm significantly more down for a remaster or a remake if I have the original body of work. I think it's even cooler if there's a big difference between it because you sort of get to compare and contrast. I don't mind that so much because oftentimes there's points in times where like the Oblivion Remaster, it's a lot more brown, which I love the color brown, but make no mistake, there's this certain something or other about original Oblivion's art style that you kind of miss out on in the remaster. You know, the remaster does try to emulate it in some places, but you know, that sort of ridiculous bloom effect that was ever present in a lot of Oblivion original isn't everywhere. You know, throughout the playthrough of Oblivion Remastered, we touch on it, how like they try to emulate more of the like rounded edges that a lot of the geometry in the game tended to have. It was the game just like had like a soft feeling to it. And there's differences in, you know, lighting and all of that. All of that crops up here and there. And that's so much easier, I think, to stomach if the original continues to persist, if you can still get that and play it if you wish, you know? There are situations where if it's maybe a video game that I don't really care too much about, you know, it's just one that I have a bit of a passing interest in, then maybe I would be like, okay, I'll just get the remaster. I'll just get the remake. And I don't need to worry about the history of it. I don't mind not approaching this from like an academic level where I want to see what came before and how that's informed some of the decisions that they made with the remake / remaster. If I'm not that into it, then I don't mind, you know. I don't mind getting the new thing. And maybe I find an interest in it and I'm like, okay, I'm really into this remake remaster. Maybe I want to buy on sale, I don't know, the original version of Kingdoms of Amalur, something like that, re-reckoning. And I want to see what it was like and all of that before the remaster. Just to use an example out of nowhere, right? I like the idea of it being out there and available. It makes it so much easier to, it makes it an easier pill to swallow. There's also points about accessibility going in the other direction, where particularly on consoles, sometimes those environments are, not always, but they are sometimes hostile to keeping older games accessible and available, especially when they're of lesser popularity, right? There's a lot of, and as well, games that have like an online component. There was the whole kerfuffle, and it's ongoing, right, with the stop killing games situation. But that's, like I said, I think that's mostly rendered to always online games, you know, which in another vein, there's also people who go through great lengths to try and keep those games alive. There's recently the Marvel Heroes game. It was like a action RPG in the vein of Path of Exile or Diablo. I put like literally 1,000 hours into this game. This was like peak MCU era too. And it's completely unavailable through normal means, but by some incredible miraculous feat, you can now play that game on private servers. They thought it wouldn't be possible. Literally, like the head developer, the design director of the studio, David Brevik of Diablo fame, was like on video saying like he just doesn't think it's possible because all of that data is gone. But somehow they did it. I would love to get like a no-clip documentary looking at all of that, but probably best to lay low on that, right? And keep the specifics out of the public eye. If anything, me talking about it here is maybe a little bridge too far. But either way, it's a little touch and go concerning. It's not just a video game, but it's a video game about a property owned by Disney, right? So I think that maybe complicates things a little bit. But it maybe a better example would be City of Heroes, City of Villains. That sort of had a resurgence, and there's people playing that MMORPG right now, which it had been taken offline for years at a point, and private servers kind of brought it back. You know, people are now able to play that. But like I said, that's neither here nor there. We're veering dangerously off topic into other stuff. When it comes to remasters and remakes, like I said, I'm very much like a holy shit two cakes type of guy, where I appreciate the fact that like these are two different experiences. If I'm super into it, obviously I want to play the original as well. If I'm not so into it, maybe there's a world in which, oh, I don't mind playing like the original release of Alan Wake instead of the Alan Wake remaster, because the differences aren't too intense on PC, and maybe I already claimed the original version of the game during like a free giveaway on like the Epic Games Store, or it was included in a Humble bundle or something like that. But on the other hand, if you want to play that game, it might be like one of the only ways you can do it on a console. You know, it's worth bearing that in mind. Like I said, it's so much of it is up to like it's a case-by-case situation. I think just blanket statementing it is so difficult and tough to go by, right? It's but holistically, I guess, at the root of it, like I said, I'm very much oh my gosh, these are two experiences, you know. I'm very much into the Elder Scrolls. There's no world in which I wouldn't have replayed Oblivion just to try the remaster. And like, if I had only played the remaster first, there's no world in which I wouldn't also want to go back and at least like screw around with the main quest of original Oblivion, you know? In thinking about this, wasn't there also, this is also unrelated, wasn't there also something in the news about problems with keeping Daggerfall Unity available? Do I need to like download Daggerfall Unity so I can play it on the channel? Just that way I like stick it on a flash drive or thumb drive somewhere for a while. Do I need to concern myself with that? Something to do with like Unity licensing potentially affecting its availability. I forget exactly what the issue is. I only saw it in like a very cursory glance, but something to be aware of. But that's another example. There's like fan-made remakes and remasters and all of that, which I'm also, part of me is dubious of. Like there's some really good talk on sort of these full conversion mods, and as well there are remakes and remasters that can be guilty of this, where they deliberately do want to make a lot of changes, not just artistically, but mechanically. This is something that a lot of the Morrowind full conversion mods are kind of guilty of, in that they look at Morrowind and they see it as sort of inherently bad, or at least a problem that needs fixing. They want to change the combat and make the combat or whatever feel more like the host game. So in the case of like, what's it even called? Morrowind? the Morrowind version, or here, better yet, Skywind. You know, Skywind is doing this, wherein they're trying to bring Morrowind into Skyrim's version of the engines, the creation engine. What these do, these games, they completely change like the very fabric of the mechanics of the game, wherein combat plays out very differently. The mechanics of like, you know, like there's perks now. There's perks in Skywind when perks do not exist in baseline Morrowind. In some way, it is a refutation of what existed in Morrowind. You're just sort of picking and choosing the part of the creative body and sort of making it into something that's more palatable for you personally and perhaps others, you know, which I think that also, I think there's an opening there to talk about like, okay, how much were you into this game? How much are you into this hobby when you don't want to taste like the raw old stuff? Some would argue that nasty old Morrowind funk, you know? Some folks are a little scared of it. They don't want to bother to learn like the intricacies of the game and how to play it or enjoy it or whatever. They don't want to approach it in that way. Of course, there's other like remasters and remakes that go through great lengths to sort of maintain a lot of the mechanics of stuff like that. But like I said, these sort of like volunteer efforts, these like player-driven full conversion mods, do very much go against the grain of a lot of the, I don't know, ethos of the original, you know? They're very much picking and choosing what they want to bring forward and what they want to leave as it was. Oftentimes they sort of relegate like storylines and all of that to how it used to be. But other things like mechanics, even dungeons and all of that, like, what's it called? Skyblivion. Speaking of Oblivion Remastered, Skyblivion is actually going to change a lot of the dungeon interiors because they do get kind of samey, you know? And in that sense, as someone who is super into the Elder Scrolls, if someone tells me that they have only ever played Skyblivion, that's their pure basis of understanding for what is and isn't the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, like, I would probably get I'd be like, okay, it's fine. You know, it's fine. If that's the only way you can, or feel interest in playing the game, so be it. But I would definitely think, like, you didn't get the real experience, right? You didn't even get Oblivion Remastered, let alone Oblivion original release. This is a completely different experience playing it as just Skyblivion. I think there is something, like, as often as we are to give flowers to these hardworking volunteer teams, right? Don't get it twisted. This isn't to say that this isn't like an enormous endeavor to perform all of this and do it for like a volunteer job, right? You're basically volunteering a ton of time. Even if you work on it for just a small amount of time, it's a ridiculous amount of effort and time spent. Make no mistake about that. But it is a very, very different artistic experience from what was originally designed, what the original creators had originally intended to be the experience for the game. If I speak to someone who that's their only frame of reference, we're not going to like mesh in a good way, because we're going to have very different frames of reference for what that experience was. It means something very different. It's drawing from something very different. I think it's cool that it exists as this weird amalgamation. But at the same time, as far as like artistic integrity goes, it is something of like a mutant, you know? It's a mutant creation that originally was not meant, like, intended to exist in this form, right? It's sort of your own thing. But I also kind of think that's kind of cool that it can exist in such a way, because that in and of itself is an expression of art. It is, I think there's no mistaking that it is in some ways a refutation of the previous art. It is sort of like looking at, you know, if we're to look at video games as art, as people often argue that video games are art and we should think about them as art, it is wild that you would look at a certain piece of that original art and be like, okay, this part was bad, we're changing it permanently, right? We're going to faithfully recreate all of this, but not really, right? We're going to, it's really wild when you consider that these are all games that are previously available, and that there are folks who would say, yeah, I'm super duper into Elder Scrolls or super duper into Fallout or whatever. But they have zero patience for the original experience, even if it's fully accessible and playable to them. They have zero patience for that original experience. There's some type of dichotomy there. I want to hesitate to go like and be like such an elitist snob, right? I don't want to be an elitist snob about it, but I do feel myself like veering down that corridor to be like, well, you didn't really play Oblivion, you didn't really play Morrowind, you just played the full conversion mod. But at the same time, like I said, that's an artistic endeavor in and of itself. That's maybe the more complicated situation. Is when they make such sweeping changes, which, like I said, very rarely, I believe, seems to happen with more officious, like, remasters and remakes. It's mostly rendered to, like, the realm of modding and all of that, you know, of these enormous full conversion mods, which, frankly, oftentimes a lot of games do not get this. It's very rare for, like, these enormous modding communities to show up as well. And I think there's another layer to this of complexity, wherein there are other teams that work on projects similar to this, that do like these enormous undertakings, completely volunteer teams, that do this and do see the original body of work. They see the original artistic vision, and they try to further emulate it and like make more of it in that exact same vein. A fantastic example of it, one which I love to bring up since I've really gotten into it and have been playing it on the regular, is Tamriel Rebuilt. Tamriel Rebuilt in Morrowind goes through great lengths to attempt to mimic the original artistic expression present in the Elder Scrolls Morrowind. It's not trying to reinvent what is already there and make it more palatable for like an audience that has only played Oblivion or an audience that has only played Skyrim, or even going further into the future. I'm sure there'll be like an Elder Scrolls 6 full conversion mod that attempts to bring Morrowind forward with those similar mechanics and all of that. I'm sure that will exist. But I do think like the team behind like Tamriel Rebuilt also deserve immense like flowers and kudos and all of that for recognizing the sort of original artistic intent behind Morrowind and not saying like, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be corrected, these are problems with it. Instead, they almost whole cloth look at the original body of work and say, we kind of love this. We're going to attempt to emulate this and make more of it as best we can. Sometimes you flub up and you make a mistake or whatever, which I don't really hold against in any form or function, because like I said, it's an entirely volunteer body of work. But my God, they get very close. Like they really, really hone in on what was originally there. They sort of just continue to take what existed and build upon that and sort of like flesh that out more. It's wild to see these very different approaches to sort of working with a project and sort of like heavily modifying a project, whether that be in a more efficient way, like a remake or a remaster, or some sort of, project that does like a full conversion mod, or something that is so long running like Tamriel Rebuilt, and attempts to be so faithful to the original, like, artistic design of what came first, In many ways, to me, Tamriel Rebuilt feels so reverent and respectful of the initial artistic division. It's kind of unreal. It's kind of like, it's like such a feat of humanity that it even exists and has existed for so long and continues to be built upon. And I think it's mind-blowingly incredible what it is. But at the same time, all this other stuff as well is incredible in its own way. I just worry about like losing stuff in translation, I guess. But I think maybe society is so like communications and information like heavy right now that maybe it's less of an issue than it would have been in like a pre-internet era where internet is so readily available. Because now there are people who are like logging this information. There are people who are more than willing to talk about it. Maybe it's like a problem that fixes itself. I don't know. All I know is what rests within my own heart, and it is, holy shit, I love two cakes. Right? That's what rests within my heart is, oh my gosh, I can play normal Morrowind myself. I could get running on my phone if I wanted to, but I dare not. I could play Tamriel Rebuilt. I could play Skywind. I could play the Oblivion. More Oblivion? Is that what it's called? The Oblivion full conversion mod. I could do any number of those things, and it's kind of cool that I can see all of them. And I love to talk to people about all of that, and I think it's neat when people sort of like interface with them and are able to have these neat experiences or whatever and share their own perspective. I think so long as you're not trying to like, I don't know. Is there more artistic merit to some over others? Like I said, I want to try as hard as I can to veer away from like elitist snobbery, you know? But part of me does think that there is, right? Is this a bad read? Is this a bad take? That there might actually, you know, as much as I would enjoy and will enjoy and play Skywind whenever it happens, there is perhaps, yeah, is there even a case in the other direction that original Morrowind, or playing and enjoying original Morrowind or Tamriel Rebuilt, has less artistic integrity and less appreciation for video games as an artistic medium relative to something which like picks and chooses and decides to update and change the soul of the game into something completely different? I think this is where we get into really interesting conversations. I think maybe I am a little bit that sort of elitist snob in that way. Maybe I am, right? But I don't want to come at from like, you know, a gatekeepy sort of way, and more so like, you should get into this as well, right? You should try out the original flavor, as it were. Yeah, it's a weird and wild place to be with these games. And there are very few games that get this sort of treatment, you know? The only other one that immediately comes to mind is, I think there's been some stuff with KOTOR. I know that FromSoft games, Demon's Souls and forward, get some of this treatment. Granted, also Bandai Namco tries to, like, bring them down often. Pokemon is another one where they tend to get this treatment in some ways as well. You could probably count the amount of games that have to get this treatment on two hands, or just one hand even, maybe. It's kind of wild. It's kind of like we're entering uncharted territory, right? Or more so, we've already entered it. We're just starting to question it even more so. But I guess at the end of the day, all you can really do is just like sort of see what rests within the cockles of your own heart. And like I said, for me, that is, wow, 2 cakes. Love it. Right. All right. That ought to do it for this one. Ended up going a lot longer than I expected and being a lot more thought-provoking than I expected. But hey, fantastic question, honestly. Getting into it from the mod angle is really wild and compelling, right? I would love to hear perspectives from people who work on these modding projects and also the games themselves, you know? And even in that case, because these are such enormous projects, I imagine that like perspectives within those like conclaves or whatever vary wildly as well. You know, I would imagine that there are people who are super like chill about a lot of it, and there are some who are like extremely militant about it in some way. It's wild. This is the type of shit that we as society should be thinking more about, right? If only we had the luxury to do that. Anyway, that'll do it for now. Until next time, please take care of each other.